Hi, it's Dr. Ray, and welcome to week 5 of Brit Lit 2 Online. I think we started off with 12 students and we're holding on at 7, but the 7 of you are doing wonderful work, so please keep it up. I apologize for the late introduction video. I had some technical problems, but my capture app is working on my iPad again, so I can introduce you to modernism. Maybe we should begin by talking about Ireland, which is, I can't believe we're going to try to do this in half a week. But the Act of Union of 1800, of course, made Ireland a part of Britain, and I'm sure everyone's aware of Irish stereotypes, and I encourage you to look up Irish political cartoons from the 1800s, because the English really made them out to be barbarians, uneducated, drunkards, that Catholicism was somehow linked to like witchcraft, like very anti-Irish, and felt like they had the right to conquer and control and cut it up and divide it among the English upper class, like certain areas, and land ownership there. And so families of English would reside there and, kind of take over the farm and count it as their own land, and their family would stay for generations and generations until they kind of identified as Anglo-Irish, meaning they had the Protestant British roots, but they also identified strongly as being Irish. And that's where William Butler Yeats falls. He's from a middle upper class Anglo-Irish family, and as we'll see in the second poem, Easter 1916, he's very divided in that, he grew up in Ireland, but he was educated in London, and he consorts with literary circles in London, but also he's a part of the Irish revival in Ireland. So we'll talk about that division in just a minute. The first poem I assigned, The Stolen Child, was largely inspired by his attachment to Irish folklore, which he got from his mother. And it's, of course, as you read it, about fairies kind of calling to a child to abandon his house and come live with them in the wild. And I was just going to read the last stanza because the first few stanzas, it sounds really enchanting. I mean, the berries and the birds, and it just sounds like a wonderful place to escape to, but there's kind of a hesitation in that last stanza, and this is on page 2086. Away with us he's going, the solemn-eyed. He'll hear no more the lowing of the calves on the warm hillside, or the kettle on the hob sing peace into his breast, or see the brown mice bob round and round the oatmeal chest. For he comes, the human child, to the waters and the wild, with a fairy hand in hand, from a world more full of weeping than he can understand. So in the end, it doesn't necessarily sound like that fairy world is necessarily better than the human world. And I'll let you make of that what you will, because in the beginning it sounds like such a better deal than growing up in a world where we know there's pain and conflict and loss. So there's a really creepy reading of it on YouTube that shows the fairies and has this haunting, bewitching voice, which you have time, I encourage you to check out. The second poem we really need to take a look at is Easter 1916, and it won't make a lot of sense if we haven't done two things. And the first is I need to explain who Maud Gunn is. She was very pro-Irish separatism. She was tall, she was an actress, she was brilliant, she was political, and Yeats was madly in love with her. He asked her to marry him many times. She always said no. She married Major John McBride, who turned out to kind of be a drunkard and jerk. And then they had a daughter, and he ended up proposing to her, and that didn't work out. And so he finally ended up getting married later in life and having children. But Maud Gunn will play into this because her husband's mentioned in the poem Easter 1916. So Easter 1916, World War I is taking place. The Irish are being called upon to fight under the British flag, and there's already this whole separatist movement. So why are we fighting for Britain? We don't feel like we're a part of it. You don't treat us like we're people, and we don't have equal rights. And they had this rebellion that was supposed to take place in Dublin on Easter 1916, but it was kind of poorly planned, and they didn't get enough people on their side, and it turned into a bloodbath. But in his poem, Yeats is really reflecting, and I think you'll see that he's torn, and that's especially elucidated in the line he keeps repeating, "In the terrible beauty is born." So I wanted to read the stanza in the middle of 2094, and this is about all the players, all the people who've gone down in history as being crucial in instigating this rebellion. The woman's days were spent in ignorant goodwill, her nights in argument until her voice grew shrill. What voice more sweet than hers, when young and beautiful, she rode to harriers? This man had kept a school, and rode our winged horse. This other, his helper and friend, was coming into his force. He might have won fame in the end, so sensitive his nature seemed, so daring and sweet his thought. This other man I had dreamed a drunken, vainglorious lout. He had done most bitter wrong to some who are near my heart. Yet I number him in the song, he too has resigned his part. In the casual comedy, he too has been changed in his turn, transformed utterly, a terrible beauty is born. So the winged horse, Pegasus, is a symbol that's very much attached to Ireland. And you can look through the footnotes for the various people that he's referring to in the poem. The vainglorious lout is Major John McBride, and the person, of course, whose heart that he cared about is Maud Gunn. So he's saying this guy's, a drunken braggart, and he hates him, but for taking part in this, he has to give him credit. And again, the terrible beauty is born, meaning even those who didn't fight in the rebellion, they saw their countrymen be crushed by the British, and this ideal of separatism is building. And not too long thereafter, I think it's 1922, that Southern Ireland became the Republic of Ireland, and Northern Ireland is now a part of Britain. And of course, there was lots of bloodshed in between because Northern Ireland is largely Protestant and part of Britain, and Southern Ireland is largely Catholic. But that's not what we're focusing on. I think it's important to understand the whole idea of what's going on through Yeats's divisiveness, because he both sympathizes with the Irish, but he feels like he's English, and there's just this tension in this poem throughout. It's really something to think about. So let's move on to George Orwell, and I'm sure you've heard of the novel 1984 if you didn't have to read it in high school or college. He's very into dystopias, the opposite of utopia, broken societies. He is English, 100%, middle upper class. He was born in Burma. A lot of Englishmen, served abroad, and that happened to be where he was born. And he wasn't doing great in school, so in his 20s he decided to become part of the British Indian Police and serve in Burma. And his real skepticism of empire just grew and grew. So the English Empire under Queen Victoria, I think we talked about, the sun never sets in the British Empire because they had colonies everywhere. And there was this enthusiasm for Britishness called jingoism, and it was all about, Queen Victoria and the British taking over and the British ideal and patriotism and long live the Queen. And, the Queen is dead. Her son was a disaster as king. And he's just really questioning, do we have a right, to be claiming authority over these other people and benefiting off their land and, materially, and treating them like they're animals. And so the narrator is very flippant and doesn't seem to care about the lives of coolies or the Burmese, and assuming that you know what's going to happen because the story is called Shooting an Elephant. I'm going to read the last paragraph, and I think that really, again, it's a whole nother divisiveness over what's going on in this moment. Afterwards, of course, there were endless discussions about the shooting of the elephant. The owner was furious, but he was only an Indian and could do nothing. Besides, legally I had done the right thing, for a man elephant has to be killed, like a mad dog, if its owner fails to control it. Among the Europeans, opinion was divided. The older men said I was right. The younger men said it was a damn shame to shoot an elephant for killing a coolie, because an elephant was worth more than a damn coolie. And afterwards, I was very glad that the coolie had been killed. It put me legally in the right, and it gave me a sufficient pretext for shooting the elephant. I often wondered whether any of the others grasped that I had done it solely to avoid looking a fool. I mean, that last paragraph is horrific, because the life of a Burmese is held much lower than that of an elephant, much less that of a Britishman, and he would rather that the Burmese man have been killed by the elephant so he could just save face. So it's all about not looking foolish. And if you think about stereotypes of English, of the English, and the British about being proud and reserved and unemotional and not looking foolish, that he's putting that above people's lives, and that really ties in this calling into question of empire. So this week, do those readings. I'm interested in your thoughts. You've heard some of my thoughts and some of what critics are saying. Be sure you watch the videos. We're doing the postings, and I'm just scrolling down to be sure I didn't miss anything on our to-do list. There's a sample paper too, because next week there's one more paper due. Your paper ones are ready, but I will email them to you tomorrow because, again, I was without my device and I felt very lost in the world. If you have any questions, email me. You're doing great, and I'm so excited to see what you have to say about Yeats and Orwell, and then to move on to our final authors.